Hello, everyone. I am Tom, and since this coronavirus disruption started, I've been hosting this vlog to eat beef jerky and connect across the internet. The beef jerky part is silly and pointless. I'm not a food critic, but this vlog has let me explore some fun ideas with you, especially regarding game design, and I plan to keep doing it. So here we are, the 21st of September. I was just reading this article about how in Australia and especially New Zealand, and I think in Taiwan too, their stringent work to protect people from the COVID virus has had a really interesting effect on influenza as well. Specifically, it basically has destroyed influenza. New Zealand specifically has not had a single case of reported influenza during their fall and winter, which is just astounding. And Australia's influenza reported cases went down for their winter from like 850 a normal winter to like 50. And that's people are pointing out that that's actually kind of believable because influenza is frankly not as virulent as COVID 19. So people protect themselves from COVID 19, they're going to protect themselves from influenza as well. There's the whole influenza, washing hands and not touching your nose and stuff. And uh, as far as I know, what I've read suggests that uh, COVID 19 does not survive well on surfaces like influenza does. And that COVID 19 is more of an airborne, uh, um, kind of a aerosolized problem. But the bottom line is that when countries work hard to avoid COVID, they're incidentally also doing a great job against the flu, the winter flu. And of course, these are all southern hemisphere countries which are just coming out of their flu season, as we here in America are going into our flu season now. So it's an important lesson. Also, I think uh, um, New Zealand had a really strong flu shot uh, program at the beginning of their fall season. At any rate, so that's where we are in 2020, in in the last half of September. And yes, I am still doing my jerky vlog and talking about games. Specifically, we've been talking about um, lesser known game genres. Game genres being things like first person shooters, and now the battle royales are a game genre now, and of course, real time strategy games and RPGs, role playing games. These are all classic and big genres, and I've been talking about some of the lesser known genres. And what I'd like to talk about today sets the Wayback Machine quite a ways because we're talking about BBS Door games. So, what is a BBS Door game? Well, let's set the Wayback Machine and talk about BBSs. Before there was an internet, there were still computers talking to other computers. And the way we did that was essentially over telephone lines. And more specifically, the tool we used for computers to call each other across telephone lines was a modem. We still have things like cable modems and other kinds of modems, but the bottom line is that back in the day, we had a specific box that we bought as an add-on to our computers, plug it in, and then plug it into our phone line for where our phone line was on the wall. And then that modem would call out to another computer, which also had a modem, and those modems would talk to each other and screech at each other in a funny way, and then connect, and then the computers could send information, usually text information, back and forth to each other. And of course, that started, of course, with the whole mainframe stuff on campuses and in businesses in the 60s and 70s, uh, and in the 80s, where you had a big mainframe and it had many or several modems connected to it, such that a bank of modems, so that you could call in and talk to that mainframe and get your work done, and do your programs and run your apps, and then send your email, and then log off and let somebody else do it. Well, even though a lot of people in that time, and by that time I'm talking the 80s, and with their home computers, like their Commodore 64s and their Apple IIs and things, um, and their Ataris and that kind of thing. Even though a lot of people had modems so that they could talk to other computers, call into other computers, they didn't realize that modems were pretty capable two-way streets, which meant that if you had a modem and you hooked it up to your telephone line and got it ready, somebody else's modem could call your modem. It would work. It would pretty much work. Your modem could go either way. Your computer could be just as easily a host as somebody else's computer. Of course, your limitation was is that you only had one telephone line. So only one person could call you at a time, and only one computer could call your computer at a time. Having said that, early multiplayer was about that. It was about, okay, I have a modem and a home computer. You have a modem and a home computer. We have each other's telephone numbers. We're going to plug both our phones in, and then we agree, oh, I guess I'm going to call you. And then we'll both play this cool game together, which works across a modem to battle it out. That was multiplayer back in the day between small computers. Now, multiplayer computer games between big mainframes and home computers had been already around for a long time. It was, again, you have a uh, you know major computer, minor computer thing. Um, Somebody was going to put a host and a client. You were going to run the client. Somebody's going to put a host on their big computer so that you could call in and play games. Genie and several other systems like that, and then of course CompuServe, all had that kind of structure that let us as a whole, as a computer using species, explore the first steps towards MMOs, towards massively multiplayer online games. Um, but there was a different piece of technology that was going on, or more specifically, a different point of view that was going on at that time. And by that time, I really mean the 80s and into the 90s. And that was called BBSs. BBS standing for, I have no idea what it stands for. But at any rate, I was telling you that your computer with your modem could work to call out to another computer, but the truth was is it would work just as fine if you could connect up your phone line properly and have somebody call in. It could work just as well if somebody called into you. So it didn't take long for a dedicated fan person to say, call up the telephone company, put me in an extra phone line that I can dedicate to my computer, so that I can have my computer sit here and take calls from other people's computers 24 hours a day. Or I could work out a deal with my family where I would monopolize the telephone line between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. So my computer would be a server that other people could call into during those periods of time. So these were kind of poor person's mainframe, poor person's hosts. So it's like you're just a little computer, but you're still providing a hosting service for other people to call in. And you would think that would be kind of weird and kind of, oh, that's only a few nerds experimenting, but it actually turned into a big deal called BBSs, because once you actually had that set up, you go, okay, I have my Commodore 64, it's sitting in the corner, I've got a dedicated phone line from the phone company plugged in so people can call into my Commodore 64 or my Apple II or my IBM PC 24/7. I only have one phone line, so they can't call in all at once. They've got to call in one at a time. And if they call and somebody else is connected, then they get a busy signal. That's how it is. They have to try again later. So, But that technology could be set up, and people did set it up. And then the very next thing was people said, well, what are we going to do with this? Well, we're going to write BBS software, Bulletin Board System. That's what it stands for, Bulletin Board System, because the idea was the first kind of implementation of that host software was a bulletin board, was a place where people could log in, put up a message, store it on the host, log off, and then somebody else comes along, logs on, and reads that message or reads the list of messages that have been posted on the virtual bulletin board. That was the idea. So there's, suddenly your host computer now contains a place where lots of people can log on, read each other's messages, and log back off. A very early primitive kind of Twitter in a way. Um, and that's cool, but people then, of course, immediately like, okay, well, what else can we do when we log onto your computer besides leave messages? I mean, it's fun to be part of a small community and connect and talk to people. That's always worth it. But what else can we do? And the answer is, maybe we could play a game. You could do with primitive stuff like leave a message and saying, well, I move, my pawn to queen 3. And then somebody else leaves a message saying, oh, well, I'm going to play with you, and I move my knight to bishop 6 or whatever. There you go. You've just played a game using the primitive bulletin board system of the time. Somebody has a host computer, a cheap little home computer with a modem plugged into the phone line. Other people call in, not synchronously. If it, unless you were rich enough to have multiple modems and multiple phone lines, everybody had to take their turn calling into that BBS, which meant that as the kind of the culture of BBSs grew, a person who wanted to log on to BBSs and participate usually logged on to half a dozen BBSs. They were part of these multiple little communities centered around these little host computers that were hosted within their own space in their own neighborhood and often their own zip code. We don't think in terms of, we don't think in terms of area code on the phone number as being that big of a deal. But there certainly was a time where area code made a really big difference in terms of how much the phone company was charging you for that phone call, especially in state and out of state. It was in the late 80s, it was kind of crazy. I got in my parents, I ran up some phone bills with my folks just talking within the state, 200 miles away. That seemed to be, for a brief period of time, that was the most expensive phone call you could make. And it was bizarre. It certainly threw me. I certainly was what? Phone calls cost money? Whoa! I was a young person at the time. What was I going to do? Anyway, so BBS's going concern, people pushing for more games. What do you do? Well, it's a weird niche little market, but it got being served. Game developers said, well, we could offer a piece of software or game, or we could write a game, much like a text adventure, where people log on to the game, that's being run currently on the host BBS, the little computer in somebody's basement or living room, and play. And since the BBS and modem system as a whole was really just about passing text back and forth, the computers would send text to each other, and it would read out on a little screen. And that'd basically be, what you would get as text. There'd be a little bit of formatting, but only a little bit, like clear the screen or go to the top or, indent. And that's basically all maybe some color embedded information. This text is now red, or this text is now blinking. That's the limit. That's the best you got in terms of how the data was sent between host and client in those early BBSs. But even working within those limitations, there were a lot of cool games that could come along. And which leads us again to this picture of a game, a BBS Door game being played with very pretty graphics that were sent. And the reason that people could do these graphics and the reason these people could do these games is because, again, it's a very small niche market, but it was still functional. Because if you're in a marketplace like I was in Houston, there were dozens of BBSs in the 80s. and they're actually literally competing with each other. They're actually within their own space. There, some of them are actually charging money, charging admission to log on to their server and do what they do, and others are just um, trying to keep up as best they can. But they're all in competition, so you've got to make your BBS more fun and more interesting than the other guys. Well, so some game developers were actually making games for BBS systems and selling them not to the individual player but to the BBS operator. And the idea that here's this external program that kind of runs on the client and server sides of this BBS situation was at the time considered a door application or door software. So BBS Door became the name of these applications or games that ran off of BBSs. And as you can certainly imagine from the underlying superstructure, there were interesting aspects of these games. They were text heavy, of course, because text was mostly what was getting sent back and forth between the computers. Um, and they were keyboard heavy, like press return to continue. They were not real time, and they were terribly asynchronous, and they often had limits on how long you could play. You could play for like 30 minutes or 20 minutes, get all your moves done, and then you're done and you're logged off of that game because it was imperative. It behooved the game, the game host, the BBS host, to let you play for a little bit each day and then log off so the next person could come log on, because that's the underlying structure. Took a long time before people got into a space where the internet was not over a phone line, and you could like I can today. I can host a game and have thousands of people simultaneously connected across the internet. That's typical today. It certainly wasn't typical in the 80s. And in the 90s. And then, of course, 95 is generally considered the idea where the internet was born, and that was mostly because of the creation of the browser and the HTML format so that people could do a hypertext link connection of the internet much, much more easily and much more seamlessly than, than the BBS Door system, which required you to actually find your BBSs in a local magazine or from word of mouth, and then actually go to your computer and type in the phone number of the BBS and have your modem call it up and connect, and often the case is you would need to actually reach out personally somehow, like by a phone call or whatever, to the BBS operator to verify that you're a real human and you're not somehow evil or government agent, because who knows who these BBS operators are, but I'm sure they all were kooky and had opinions. Um, so it was a big deal. It was a time. It was a space. It was a technology. And as always with computers, it was also about games. And BBS Door games were a particular weird flavor. And there's groups in America that are now working very hard about video game history and video game making sure that video games don't die and go into oblivion, which is a really hard job considering how fast the technology moves and how much these games get left behind by technology shifts. And some of the harder games to kind of document and protect from the ravages of time are these BBS Door games, because they operated on very specific hardware in a very specific weird way that nobody does anymore. At a time a long time ago, and it was a very small subgroup. So you go up to the average person on the street today um, and say Candy Crush, and they're like, "Oh, we know that." But you could go up to the average person on the street today, or in the 80s, and say BBS Door games, and nobody would know what you're talking about. That's how niche it was. So, BBS Door games, fascinating. I never personally played a lot of them myself, so I didn't really see the magic. But they were there, and some of them reportedly were pretty awesome. And and really pushed the technology forward, or really were cutting edge for their time. And of course, it's a desperate shame that so few saw that. Though, enough did to remember it years later. BBS Door games, an interesting little subgenre that, it's worth remembering. Okay, so as you can see from here, this blog is really about beef jerky. And we're going to continue working on the set of beef jerky that Adam Para sent me. Fan, good friend of the show. Um, this is Zick's Elk Hickory with beef jerky. The last time we had Zick's, I declared it was ostrich jerky, and I declared it orcish jerky because it was so dense and dark and frankly challenging. So I know I'm going into here with this elk hickory, but let's give it a try. All right, take it out. Smells like beef jerky. I've got a piece. Hmm. Mm. Not as hard. Definitely a gentler texture than the last 6 beef jerky we tried. A little spicier too. Mm. Yeah, definitely spicier. Still, there's a little hint of molassesy darkness, but not as much as last time. And it's definitely a little spicier. It's not burning my mouth, but the spice is definitely there. Yeah, thank you, Adam. All right. At this point, this is where we all look in the mailbag. And as usual, I look on YouTube and I've got a quick response from Adam Para, who just said that he likes the fact that I got to try the jerky. I certainly did, and I appreciate it, Adam. He says, it took me a while to figure out you were talking about games like Worms. I spent many hours playing Worms. Yeah, that was a previous episode when we were talking about artillery games, which was also the Team 17 Worms product that was a big hit in the 90s. He says, I agree that Angry Birds is a lot like Worms. Yeah, mechanically I think that you can easily draw a line between them. I think that Angry Birds is a lot not like artillery in some ways, uh, but it's also very much like it in some ways. So yeah, I think that the notional vision of what artillery games are was to my mind very much the back and forth, the multiplayer aspect of you shoot, then I shoot, then you shoot, then you shoot, and that's quite true in the Worms products, but not so much in the Angry Birds products. So there may be a multiplayer Angry Birds I haven't played yet. Also, the later games like Scorched Earth really moved forward in 2 specific ways, which was the large number of weapons and the deformable terrain, both of which Worms had. And I don't know that Angry Birds has it in quite the same way. Angry Birds has it in the sense of you have these physics game tower toppling mechanics, which is not the same thing as blowing a hole in the terrain. And also, Angry Birds had different sorts of birds, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. But as we saw last time, the Scorched Earth games had hundreds of unique weapons and bullet types. So the connection's there, but I wouldn't say that Angry Birds is the logical next step for artillery. I would say that it's a cousin. Um, but thanks for replying, Adam. And again, thanks for the jerky. It was actually quite tasty. Not too hot, not too dark, not too hard. Um, Wick's elk jerky. So As we did this last time, let's do this again this time. Let's play a game together called Now That's a Game. What I want you to do is leave a message on YouTube or on Facebook and come up with the idea for a game. Say it's a game where a something has to something a something on a something. Write that out, not with the word something, but fill in the blanks, kind of like a Mad Libs. Post that. I'll read it in the next episode, and we'll talk about it. We'll laugh about it. We'll look at the silliness, but we'll also look seriously about what that kind of game would be and what it would take to make such a game. So, and then you could say, "What do you think?" And we can all say, "This is what we think." So, I hope that sounds fun to you. I hope you participate, and I hope you watch next time. Thanks for watching this time, and I'll see you next time.